my name is Muriel Banakissa and I'm a food photographer, recipe developer, and content creator. And on this YouTube channel, I like to talk about food photography. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through my camera settings. So we'll be covering topics like how to set white balance on your camera, why I shoot in autofocus sometimes and other times in manual focus, and lastly, why I shoot in RAW and why I think you should also shoot in RAW. So if you're interested in these topics, make sure to watch this video from beginning to the end. Before we jump into the core topics of this video, I want to preface it by saying that the camera that I use is a Canon 80D. It's a camera that is a cropped sensor, but I use it for all of my work, from client work to personal work and even filming videos like the one you're watching right now. Therefore, when I will be referring to some settings and how to change them in cameras such as white balance and manual focus and things like that, my explanations will be very Canon specific. However, I will do my best and find articles that can help you do the same if you have other models of cameras such as Nikon, Sony, Fuji, and others. But if you have any specific questions or you can't find the information that you're looking for, feel free to leave me a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer all your questions. The first topic that I want to cover is setting white balance. Setting white balance is actually really important in photography. It could really make an image pop, and it could alternatively also make an image look not so natural and not so good. Of course, if you've been watching my videos for a while, you know that there's no such thing as a wrong setting or a wrong type of editing. It's all a matter of taste. However, for the sake of food photography, when I refer to proper white balance, we will be talking about a white balance that kind of brings out the natural colors of the food. When I started my food photography journey, I would oftentimes rely on setting my white balance through the profiles that are built into my Canon camera. So those profiles include daylight, shade, cloudy, tungsten light, and fluorescent light. Out of all of those, I would use daylight, shade, and cloudy the most often because they were the ones that I felt were much closer to what I was actually seeing. Outside of the profiles that I mentioned, there are 4 other profiles that are available in the Canon cameras. There's auto. Auto is basically automatic, right? So when you're taking a photo and your white balance is set on auto, you're just kind of letting the camera observe the color and the temperature of the light outside and adjusting the colors based off of what it's seeing. That is the one that I tend to rely on the least, especially if you're shooting with natural light. You can get so much variations in terms of color that your camera is picking up. However, when I'm shooting outside and when I'm shooting with people, auto oftentimes is quite accurate, and therefore I still use it a bit in photography outside of food photography. The flash profile is a profile that is created specifically for people who shoot with flash. It is a profile that kind of works in the same way as auto, in the sense that it takes into account the fact that you're shooting with a flash and adjust the white balance accordingly. It's a setting that I've discovered thanks to Joni Simon's Artificial Academy, and it's one that I've used a lot more because I am experimenting more with shooting with flash. The custom setting is a setting that you would use if you have a gray card. Basically, you would take that gray card, put it in your scene, take a photo of the gray card in your scene, and then select on your camera the custom white balance, and you would select the image that has the gray card on it. And what happens is that your camera takes into account all the information in the image with the gray card and adjusts the temperature according to that information. I personally have purchased a gray card a few months ago, maybe a year ago, and at first I used it quite a bit in order to set my white balance. It's just, for some reason, I felt like there were always a little bit of tweaks that I needed to do in order for my white balance to be exactly where I wanted it to be. Therefore, it's not really a setting that I heavily rely on. However, the one setting that I rely on is the Kelvins. You might already know this, but in case you didn't, Kelvins actually represent the temperature of the light, and that temperature is measured on a scale from warmest to coldest. This temperature is measured in kelvins. So to put it very simply, the higher the Kelvin, the colder the temperature would be. It's kind of like the opposite of what your mind would naturally think, but that is exactly where your camera comes in. Your camera compensates for the color of the light. So if you wanted to do a shoot in the morning when the light is a lot more blue than it is warm, by bringing out your camera, turning it on, and positioning it in your scene, you can play with the Kelvins in order for the light to appear more warm than it actually is because you're shooting in the morning. So there's a very simple way that I personally use whenever I shoot in the Kelvin profile, and that is to think of, if I want my image to appear more yellow or warmer, I will actually increase my Kelvins, and if I want my image to appear colder or bluer, I will actually decrease my Kelvins on the camera. So think of higher Kelvins, oh, it's hot, so I want the image to be more yellow, and lower Kelvins, oh, it's cold, I want the image to appear a little bit more blue. And just to illustrate this point, here are 3 images. I've shot these images at 3 different Kelvins, and this really goes to show that the more you increase the Kelvins, the warmer the image becomes. For me, Kelvins is my absolute go-to when shooting food. I find it really allows me the flexibility to tweak an image and have it the perfect white balance. One important thing to remember though is, don't worry if your white balance is not perfect on your images straight out of camera. If you're shooting in RAW, which we're going to get to very shortly, you will be able to tweak your white balance in post-production when you're editing your images in Lightroom or Capture One or whichever software you use to edit your photos. The way to change your white balance in post-production is very, very simple. If you are using Lightroom, you simply have to open your image in Lightroom and then play with the sliders in the basic panel in the white balance section. So play with the blue and yellow slider to make your image a little bit warmer or a little bit cooler. Also, if you notice that your image has a little bit of a purple undertone or more of a green undertone, you can play with that tint slider and move it from left to right to really get the perfect white balance on your photo. Let's move to our next topic, which is shooting in RAW and why it's so important. Shooting in RAW is so important because it allows your camera to capture all of the data recorded when you take a photo. When you shoot in JPEG as opposed to shooting in RAW, what your camera does is that it compresses a lot of the information that was present in that image. And what that does is that, yes, your file size is a lot smaller, but it also allows you a lot less flexibility when it comes time to editing because a lot of that initial information is actually lost. Just to give you an example, these are 2 images that I've shot in the same day, minutes apart. This image on the left is an image that I shot in RAW, and the size of that image is actually 25 megabytes. As opposed to the other image on the right, which was shot in JPEG, and the size of this image is 4.5 megabytes. You really see that there's quite a big difference between the weight of both of those images. And if I were to edit those 2 images in Lightroom, the amount of editing I would be able to do on these images would not be the same, simply because in the JPEG image, a lot of information is gone, and therefore you're unable to tweak the image as much as you would be able to if you had shot in RAW. Now, to take my point even further, I wanted to see what would happen if I would apply the exact same preset on 2 different images. One of them that was a RAW image and the other one that was a JPEG image. And so let's take a look at the results. These are the 2 images that I ended up with. This is the JPEG image and this is the RAW image. As you can see, the difference is almost like insignificant. I think that in the case of the RAW image, the colors are a little bit more vibrant and a little bit more intense, whereas in the JPEG image, it's not so much the case. But, you know, in this case, I don't think you would really be able to tell the difference between what is a JPEG image and what is a RAW image. However, if ever at some point in your life, and this will most likely happen, you find yourself shooting an image that is overexposed or underexposed, or an image that you really want to completely change the colors of a certain ingredient or a certain garnish or a certain food, then you might run into a problem. Because, as I mentioned, when you are shooting with a RAW image, there's a lot more information contained in that one image, as opposed to if you were shooting with a JPEG. So let's say you are shooting a top-down dish on a white backdrop with the light coming from the top, right? And in the moment you're shooting, you know, you're busy, you're doing your thing, and then you upload your image onto Lightroom, and then you notice that, oh no, that part is way overexposed, I'm losing a lot of detail, what can I do? If you had shot that image in RAW, honestly, you can recover quite a little bit of information there, add some texture back, bring the brightness a lot lower. Whereas if you were shooting with a JPEG, yes, you can still tweak that part to make it a lot less intense, bring back the detail. However, you're going to start seeing that the quality of the image is not going to be as good. It's going to be a lot more grainy, and you won't simply be able to do as much. So all in all, that is not to say that if you shoot in JPEG, your images are completely ruined. There's nothing you can do with them. There's no edits that you can apply on them. That is absolutely not true. However, if you are a person who is thinking of doing photography on a more professional level, I think it is important to give yourself as much flexibility as possible when it comes to your edits, because you will have situations where you will have to do a lot more extensive editing, and if the information is lost, there's nothing you can really do to recover it. So we've made it to the third and final topic of this video, which is shooting in autofocus vs manual focus. When I shoot food photos in natural light, I rely on manual focus 99.9% of the time, and especially when I shoot with a low f-stop, because the last thing you want when you shoot with a low f-stop is to have your focus slightly off and then realize it in post-production that the middle of your zucchini bread is actually kind of blurry and it's the edges that are in focus. I'm talking from experience. For me, shooting in manual focus along with shooting on a tripod allows me to have tack sharp focus every single time without fail. And so you might wonder, how do you do it, Muriel? I've used manual focus and for some reason it doesn't work. And so the first question for you guys is, are you shooting on a tripod? If you are not shooting on a tripod, really please shoot on a tripod when you're shooting with manual focus. This will just allow you the flexibility of not having to think about holding your camera in that one specific place once you've set the focus. You can just have your camera on your tripod, place it in exactly the position that you want it to be, zoom in into your image and make sure the focus is sharp. So how do you zoom in onto your image and make sure the focus is sharp? So this is where I'm going to explain the Canon way of doing it. If you want more tutorials on other cameras, I'm going to link them in the description below. So with my Canon, what I do is quite simple. First thing is I put my camera in live view. I turn on the manual mode. The way I do that is simply by flipping the switch on the lens on my camera to manual. Then once that's done, I press the little magnifying glass with the plus sign in the top right corner of my camera. This will bring out a rectangle that you can move around on your frame. The way I do it is I position that rectangle specifically on the place that I want to be in perfect focus. Then once that's done, I press the little magnifying glass with the plus on it once again to zoom in into this area. So what you'll start seeing is that the area that you want to focus on and that you selected is going to be a lot closer than it initially was. From there, what you can do is you can press the magnifying glass once more if you want to zoom in even more, or you can just stay in this position and then you just have to rotate your focus ring on your lens to set the focus on your subject, and ta-da! You're done. Your focus is set. From there, once your focus is set, if you've pressed only once on the magnifying glass to zoom in, you'll have to press it 2 more times, and if you've zoomed in already twice, you'll have to just press 1 more time and you'll be out of it, and you'll just see your image as it is with the perfect focus set, and you'll be able to start shooting. One thing that I always do when I shoot in manual focus is the moment I move my camera around, whether it is moving it upwards a little bit, tilting it to the side, moving it overhead, I always repeat this process of pressing on the little button with the magnifying glass so that I make sure that my focus is right every single time. When it comes to shooting with artificial light, I've personally continued to use manual focus when I shoot with my flash. However, once I know for sure that I've gotten all the images that I needed to get and I know that they're perfectly sharp, then I take my camera off my tripod and start shooting handheld and move around my scene. And in those moments, I very often rely on autofocus. However, when I do that, I don't use any kind of autofocus. On my Canon camera, there are 4 different ways that you can set autofocus. The first way is auto selection 45 points AF. This setting basically lets your camera set the autofocus completely on its own. So you're not telling your camera that you want to focus in a specific part of the image. It really just chooses what part of the image it focuses on. I honestly never use this. I don't use it in food photography. I don't even use it in lifestyle travel photography. And the reason why I never use this type of autofocus in food photography is because you don't want anything in your scene to be in focus. You're shooting with intention, so you want your main subject to be in focus. And by letting your camera just choose whatever it thinks is most important in your scene can lead to very interesting results, and oftentimes having your subject not being in perfect focus. The second type of autofocus is manual selection large zone AF. This setting allows you to choose what zone do you want to set the focus on. My camera has 3 zones that I can choose the focus to be on. So you have the left, the middle, and the right. And yeah, you basically choose which zone is most important, or in other words, in which zone is your main subject located in, and you select that zone and your camera will automatically focus on points in that specific zone. The reason why I don't really use this autofocus setting either is because it still gives a lot of power to the camera to choose which autofocus points within that area are the most important. And for me, again, we're talking about precision. In food photography, precision is really, really important, and I'd rather the focus to be a lot more smaller and specific. The third autofocus setting is manual selection zone AF. So the one I just mentioned before was the large zone, and this one is zone. So basically what this setting does is that it allows you to select 9 points in all of the points that you have in your camera on which the focus will be on. I don't really use that either that much, although it is more precise than the large zone because it constricts the focus to 9 points. Again, I still don't have enough flexibility for me. However, I do find that this setting is a lot more useful when shooting lifestyle photos or when I shoot travel photos. The last autofocus setting is manual selection 1.AF. This setting is a setting that I use the most often when I shoot food photos, and quite often as well when I shoot people and travel and lifestyle photos. This setting simply allows you to select 1 point out of all the points of autofocus that you have in your camera and to set the focus on that specific point. My camera has 45 points, so out of the 45 points, I'm able to select the point where I want the focus to be on. So let's say if I'm shooting a cupcake and I want the icing of the cupcake to be the part that is the sharpest part of the image, then I would move that focus point onto the icing and that part of the photo will be very sharp. Again, as mentioned before, I personally prefer using manual focus because it allows me a lot more flexibility, a lot more precision. However, autofocus is still a feature that can be very, very helpful, and they tend to be quite developed in most recent cameras, and so it's one that I've kind of started to play around with a lot more in the past year or so. And let me know in the comments below, do you tend to shoot manual focus or autofocus? And if you shoot autofocus, which mode do you use on your camera? Well, that's it, you guys. You've made it to the very end of this video. I hope you learned something new about setting your white balance, why shooting in RAW is so important, and also how to set your manual focus and how to play around with the different modes of autofocus on your camera. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, share, subscribe, comment below if you learned something new and what it is that you learned. And on that note, I wish you a beautiful rest of your day, and I'll see you very soon.